Welcome to the fourth episode of CN Live. I'm Joe Lauria, Editor-in-Chief of Consortium News.
And I'm Elizabeth Voss.
On today's show, we will break down this week's Democratic Party debates with a candidate who appeared to qualify for those debates, but who was shut out by the Democratic National Committee. Former U.S. Senator Mike Ravel, who read the Pentagon Papers into the congressional record, will be joining us from Seaside, California.
And then an interview with internet entrepreneur Dotcom, conducted by Joe recently at Kim's home in Queenstown, New Zealand, in which Kim discusses his view of how the DNC and Podesta emails were obtained and transferred to WikiLeaks, still a source of controversy more than 3 years later.
William Binney, former National Security Agency Technical Director, will be joining us live to analyze Kim's comments.
In this week's segment of By George, author George Szamuely will join us to analyze the entire show.
But first, the headlines.
The Democratic Party held two more debates this week to help determine who will be its 2020 presidential nominee. The first debate was highlighted by establishment candidates ganging up on Senator Elizabeth Warren, trying to portray as unrealistic the health insurance plan that exists in much of the world. The second debate saw Tulsi Gabbard take on Senator Kamala Harris over her record as a prosecutor. Meanwhile, Joe Biden somehow still clings to the lead in the Democratic pack. Absent from the stage was former Senator Mike Ravel, though he appeared to qualify for the debate.
A lawsuit the Democratic National Committee brought against WikiLeaks and the Russian government for stealing their, quote, trade secrets was thrown out by a federal judge this week. Judge John G. Cotto on Tuesday ruled if WikiLeaks could be held liable for publishing documents concerning the DNC's political, financial, and voter engagement strategies simply because the DNC labels them secret and trade secrets, then so could any newspaper, other media outlet. The judge also said the First Amendment prevents such liability in the same way it would preclude liability for press outlets that publish materials of public interest despite defects in the way the materials were obtained, so as long as the disseminator did not participate in any wrongdoing in obtaining the materials in the first place. A person is entitled to publish stolen documents that the publisher requested from a source as long as the publisher did not participate in the theft. Some WikiLeaks, that was a quote from the ruling by the judge. Some WikiLeaks supporters are interpreting this ruling as a boost for Assange in his extradition battle in Britain. But though the judge cited the Pentagon Papers case, his decision was about private, not classified material, which did not fall under the Espionage Act. We'll be discussing this later in the show. Elizabeth, can you give us your views of the debate as you saw them? The first night was sort of the centrists ganging up on Elizabeth Warren and Senator Bernie Sanders, both of whom are just behind the front runner, the geriatric Joe Biden. Now, Sanders and Warren are the most progressive left candidates out there, and they are having a very successful time right now. So they are a threat to the centrists, and they ganged up on them. And then the second debate, the night afterward, the highlight was the clash between Tulsi Gabbard and Kamala Harris. Just give us your observations.
Yes, I thought that the first debate was relatively, run-of-the-mill in terms of the type of centrist, as you say, ganging up on both Bernie Sanders and Senator Elizabeth Warren. I thought that was relatively predictable. I didn't take away too much that was, new or unseen from that first debate. But obviously, the second debate was the sort of showstopper with Tulsi Gabbard just absolutely destroying, Kamala Harris over her record as a prosecutor. I was really impressed to see Tulsi, take that opportunity to bring that point to the debate stage, because as Consortium News Live, CN Live has discussed earlier with Marjorie Cohn, who wrote a brilliant piece discussing Kamala Harris's record as a prosecutor and the in-depth and multifaceted ways that she has been just absolutely incredibly, I want to say corrupt, but also just overzealous and absolutely the opposite of a progressive prosecutor, which is what Kamala Harris sort of labels herself as. So I'm really glad that Tulsi did address this. And I'm also glad specifically that she addressed the fact that, Kamala Harris did basically, intensely prosecute people for the use of marijuana. And then she did joke about it later on in trying to make herself seem, it appeared to many of us in the sort of progressive independent media sphere, tried to make herself seem more relatable by laughing about having used marijuana in college. And so I'm so glad that Tulsi Gabbard was able to confront her on that type of hypocrisy. And that was something that was unexpected to me, and I think really did resonate with a lot of people. And that's why after the debate and during the debate, we saw that hashtag practically go viral, which was hashtag Kamala Harris destroyed. And of course, then we saw the response from Kamala Harris was not to actually address her record at all, or to address anything that Tulsi Gabbard said. It was simply to deflect, as we saw in 2016, deflecting from the kind of DNC rigging against Sanders onto this Russian interference. We saw Kamala Harris basically blame the Russians again for Tulsi Gabbard confronting Kamala over her history. Joe, I don't know. I assume you've seen that clip. What were your thoughts?
Actually, Elizabeth, I wasn't listening to you because I was just on the phone with Mike Ravel, trying to get him to join our program. And there's an interesting reason why he's a little bit delayed, and that is because he was just on the phone with Tulsi Gabbard. So he hung up with Tulsi, and he's going to join us now. He's going upstairs to his office, and I just sent him the link again. So tell Mike, he's going to tell us what he just talked about with Tulsi. Ask me again about the clip and what I thought of it.
Yeah, basically, I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that clip of Tulsi Gabbard just eviscerating Kamala Harris for her record as prosecutor. Not only the clip itself, but also I was wondering about your thoughts on the way that Kamala Harris tried to squirm out of that post-debate by basically blaming the Russians again and, throwing the Assad name into the ring just to try and deflect. I mean, what were your thoughts on that attempt?
Well,
to get out of it?
I was watching transfixed the face of Kamala Harris when she was under attack. I wasn't even looking at Tulsi, just to see how she was holding up onto this. Obviously, she looked extremely uncomfortable. She's aware of these criticisms before, and her initial reaction was she was doing what the people wanted, and she was being tough. I mean, like has always worked, unfortunately, in U.S. elections, tough on crime. So she didn't dispute any of that horrible record of hers. That is the most interesting part. So it all comes down to how you view it as a voter. If you want people who smoke marijuana to be thrown in jail, and if you want somebody on death row to almost be executed without full access to justice, then you won't matter. It won't matter to you. But she didn't come out looking good from our point of view, I guess. As far as turning to the Russians, well, that's what they're there for, aren't they? That's why the Russian nation exists. So that whenever something goes wrong, whatever it might be, I know I stubbed my toe here the other day. I was about to blame Vladimir for that, but I held back. So yeah, Russia is in fact the scapegoat par excellence, and she turning to that again is just maybe we heard last week from Margaret Kimberly, recall how Russia was blamed by Kamala Harris in regard to the whole fiasco with Kaepernick, the football player who can't get a contract because he knelt down at the national anthem. So Russia being used by her, again, that's an interesting question. It's also up to the voter. Does that matter to them? And many polls showed it doesn't, that don't really care about Russia. Even in the height of the Russiagate mania, when the polls came out, many people were, of course, concerned about the economic issues that face them and their family, putting family food on their family, as George W. Bush once infamously said. They care about the neoliberal attacks that they don't know what that word means. It doesn't mean a new political liberal. It means an economic policy. The laissez-faire was the old word for that back in the 19th century, where government just gets the hell out of the economy and lets capitalists run wild. And that's what we've had in the United States since at least 1980. Reagan and Thatcher ushered those two things in, and we're seeing the devastation that has brought across the country. That Trump, in his inaugural speech, talked about the desolate America. Of course, that resonated with me, but then we've seen what kind of president Trump's been. He doesn't really give a damn about those people. He stirs them up through racial and anti-immigrant sentiments, unfortunately. So Russia and Russia has he hasn't had to use Russia, but we have to also remember Russia, going all the way back to the first Cold War, was always the way to smear a candidate. Remember George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton apparently studied or visited Moscow when he was a student, and Bush Sr. brought that up in the debates. That was some kind of a terrible thing that Bill Clinton had done. And guess what? It didn't matter because Clinton beat Bush. So I suspect that if the Democrats keep using Russia, especially after the Mueller report concluded there was no collusion, and the whole obstruction thing is not very solid either, since there was no underlying crime to begin with. And Mueller's performance the other day in front of the House and Intelligence and Judiciary Committees was so appalling, where he seemed to be on the verge of senility until he snapped to attention to make political points about Russia, for example, still at it. I don't know if that's going to work. I don't know if it's going to help Kamala in this instance, or whether the Democrats are going to continue to harp on that, or whether that will help them again. They blamed Russia before the election last time, right after the convention, right after the WikiLeaks tranche came out on the DNC emails just before the convention, which led to the resignation of Debbie Wasserman Schultz. They blamed Russia, and Clinton still lost. So I think that's obviously a losing strategy.
Absolutely.
If they have to cling to that, yeah, they're in trouble.
No, I think that I completely agree that the idea of deflecting from Russia, I don't think that resonates with people, but I almost feel that the Democratic Party is not so much trying to convince with the deflection onto Russiagate, but what they are trying to do is smash or try to build up a false sense of lack of consensus. They're trying to cover up the fact that the destruction of Kamala Harris by Tulsi Gabbard resonated with people. So instead of recognizing that liberals, progressives, Democratic voters who are going to vote in the primary resonated with that moment and it was trending, they try to just blame that on Russian bot activity. They try to basically act as if that resonance doesn't exist. And I think that's exactly what we saw in 2016 with Bernie Sanders' campaign. They tried to blame Russia for what was a really growing progressive movement that supported Sanders, despite the lack of name recognition he had. So I think there's definitely multiple facets to what the Democrats gained from Russiagate and the continued use of Russiagate. And I don't think all of it has to do with winning elections. I think some of it is just to try and create this facade that their voting base does not agree with Tulsi Gabbard, does not support Sanders and that type of thing.
Facade rhymes with Assad, which was the other big name of the night. Now, Mike Ravel, we're waiting for Mike Ravel, by the way, to join us. He just got off the phone with Tulsi Gabbard. So in the meantime, Elizabeth and I are discussing the debates this week. Assad, the president, Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria, Tulsi Gabbard, wisely, in my view, went to see various players to see if there's a diplomatic solution to this horrible war that's been going on now since 2011, 8 years. And she met with President Assad, who's one of the major players, obviously, and they have been attacking her for that meeting as an Assad apologist and displaying their absolute ignorance of that war, because she's had the guts to point out the U.S. with their Gulf Arab allies have supported the jihadists against the government of Assad. And in my view, that's the worse evil than Assad. We're joined now by Mike Ravel, Senator Mike Ravel from Seaside, California. Mike Ravel, of course, is known for reading the Pentagon Papers into congressional record. He served in the Senate from 1969 to 1980, and Mike was a candidate for the Democratic nomination 2008. And he is right now again a candidate for 2020. And he, as far as I know, he met all the requirements laid down by the Democratic National Committee to enter these debates that we've been talking about on either Tuesday or Wednesday night. And he raised more money from more people than several other candidates. He beat them in certain polls. I'm talking about sitting mayors and governors, whatnot. He got more money than those people. And Mike's been out of government politics for quite a while now. Mike Ravel, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. And of course, it's no surprise to me that the Democratic Party cut me out of the debates. They don't particularly like the message that I normally advocate, but there was a new message that would have been very valuable for them to hear at the debates. And that is that obviously Trump is using the democratic socialism as a major thrust of his campaign. Well, what we've got to do is counter by talking about the Republican socialism and comparing the two. So democratic socialism benefits people, healthcare, education, you name it, infrastructure. And the Republican socialism benefits the 1% and is cruelly impacting poor individuals trying to get into this country legally and properly. And then, of course, it's an effort to shore up and back up the military-industrial complex. So those are the things that happen under Republican socialism. And if the Democrats don't pick up this theme of democratic socialism and Republican socialism, they could lose, because what their plan is to really denigrate the word socialist. Well, all socialism means is that you're using government as a tool of collective action. That's all that means. And so if you're using government for a collective action to benefit people, well, that's democratic socialism. But if you're using that Republican attitude or socialism to benefit the 1%, well, that's a comparison that needs to be made all the time, and it'll cause Trump's tactics to backfire. But this is what I would have put forth on the Democratic debate had I been permitted to be on. And so we're now we're taking this press release and moving it around to as many people as possible, so that the Democrats will begin to press on democratic socialism and Republican socialism.
Mike, that's a very brilliant analysis, and I'm glad you're saying it here. It would have been better on the stage there, obviously. Just quickly, where do you stand with that? Are you suing the DNC? And tell us what was the official reason they gave you, and what were the actual results of your fundraising and polls?
No, we raised $68,000, so from 68,000 donors. But in addition to that, hang on, let me close the window.
Okay. Elizabeth, what did you think about Mike's view of socialism? I think was pretty brilliant, because there is socialism for the rich, government collective action for the 1%, or government collective action for the rest of us.
Absolutely. I thought it was a great point. Fantastic point. I agree with you. It should have been made on the debate stage. It's something that I haven't heard anyone bring up so far in the debates, obviously, unsurprisingly. But it is something I've heard, many progressives talk about, is when you are a libertarian or a conservative, a fiscal conservative, and you say, well, we can't afford, social benefits, and we can't afford, food stamps and all these different programs. Well, they kind of have this blind spot when it comes to bailing out banks and the military industrial complex and all these other things where we do provide a lot of socialism, just as Mike pointed out. And I think I really wish that would have been aired in front of all the rest of the candidates.
Yeah. Well, we're lucky to have Mike here now. So Mike, carry on. You got the 60, whatever.
We got over the 65,000.
Right.
We were in the proper debate, one debate that I qualified for. Now, what's happened in the other 2 or 3 polling debates, they did not enter my name. Now, we asked whether this was done by the DNC, Perez, or whether this was done by the polling company. Well, the DNC said it was the polling company that made that decision, which either case, it's absolutely undemocratic, ridiculous to let the polling companies decide as to who they're going to poll if you're going to make that a criteria of participation in the debates. But I knew going in that this is what happened the last time when Howard Dean and General Electric teamed up to keep me out of the debates in the 2008 cycle. And so now we're doing the same thing. But it doesn't surprise me that the Democratic leadership is not on tune with the people in question. They're so afraid of a progressive agenda winning the day in the primaries that they're doing everything to sabotage it. But I think that there's 2 people, there's 3, and Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and Tulsi Gabbard that are going to fight that process. And any one of those could break through, and I hope it's Tulsi. In fact, I was just on the phone with her, and it looked like she's going to qualify for the debates in September. And whenever she gets on, she just rises like a phoenix. I've never seen a political personage that has her level of gravitas and steadiness. She would make a great president, not a good president, a great president.
Well, Mike, we were sorry that you were late, but we're happy the reason was that you were on the phone with Tulsi Gabbard. What can you reveal about that conversation to us?
Well, she's going to put out a press release where I'm one of her surrogates, And then she's going off in September to do her 2-week military stint. And during that time, I will be one of her surrogates and doing all the media on her behalf. So that's what she was asking me, and I in a heartbeat, I would help her out. And so it's interesting that she's going to be doing her 2 weeks military requirements when the rest are out there campaigning, bloviating over and supporting the unbelievable expenditures for the military-industrial complex.
Could you be referring to chicken hawk Joe Biden by any chance?
Yes, for sure. That's right. Chicken hawk is right. Well, the whole Republican Party are a bunch of chicken hawks, and a lot of Democrats. You just saw this military budget approved. The highest on record. What the hell is a Democrat voting for a budget like that, which is one to expand our nuclear capability for first strike? There's an interesting situation. The United States and Russia was asking if China would come to a conference and discuss nuclear capabilities. Well, China says, well, we're not interested in going to this. All we got is a couple hundred weapons, and you people got weapons in the thousands. So what are we going to discuss? That you'll come down to our level? Obviously, that's not going to happen. And so the Chinese have just pulled back and said, look, have all the conferences you want, but we only got a couple hundred, and we got nothing to discuss with you other than you're bringing down your weapons to a couple hundred when we got 6,500 in reserve and 1,500 and a high trigger. It's a sick situation. That's the best I can say. The stupidity of, and this is not just the president, we're talking about the Congress who voted for all this stuff. And the Congress is, of course, involved in sanctions. And that's the other thing that just jars me, is sanctions is actually waging war by another means. But these means kill people as much as you kill in war. Here, during the Iraq War, prior to that, Clinton was sanctioning Iraqis, and it killed about 500,000 kids. Now, that's about the same number of people who died in the United States with the opioid crisis. And look at how we get all exercised. And of course, with Clinton, Madeleine Albright said, well, the 500,000 kids, that's collateral damage. That's not collateral damage. It's murder by any other voice. And of course, now with what's going on in Venezuela, we've had upward of 40,000 kids died in Venezuela, and keep in mind, the sanction is just stupid. Not only immoral, but stupid, because the thesis is that what you're going to do is you're going to punish and inflict pain on the poor so that they will rise up and throw off their tyrants. Well, just the opposite happens. It strengthens the hand of the tyrants because they can blame their incompetence on the United States cruelty with
just the way American politicians blame their incompetence on Russia. Elizabeth, I think you had a question for Senator Ravel.
I did. I was wondering, in addition to Joe Biden, was there any particular candidate that you would have addressed if you had been on the debate stage? And if so, what would you have said to them?
Well, I don't think he handled himself all that well. And unfortunately, I'm happy he was getting hammered. I'm glad that Tulsi took on, what's her name from California? Kamala Harris. So, but Joe is, he's just really, it's very sad. He's a nice guy personally, but when it comes to issues and policies, he's a Neanderthal. He goes back further than anybody possibly could go back. And he has no memory on this. When he savaged Anita Hill, and then turned around and refused to give the voice to here.
If that's Tulsi, tell her we want to interview her.
Yep, exactly.
Well, too bad we couldn't get her on. Oh, Jesus. we get, they ought to pass that goddamn law if they had any guts, the robocalls that interrupt us. But no, I've got Telsey's number here. What I'd like you to call.
Don't read it out, Mike, because the whole world will get it. But,
that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
you can pass it on to us later if you'd like.
I'll send it to you. And
she'll change her number within 3 minutes of the finish of this broadcast.
Okay. Thank you for telling me, because I don't want to. Okay. But she's waging a wonderful campaign. Bernie did very well, and so did Elizabeth Warren. So those are the three that are my favorites. First being Tulsi, then Bernie, and then Elizabeth. And so, since they're doing well, it's really getting the Democratic leadership uptight, because it would appear that what is winning today is the progressive agenda, and that's of course what I feel is happening, and will continue to happen as people focus on what's going on.
Mike, they keep making this point that I'm talking about the centrist Democrats, that Bernie and Elizabeth's plans, let's say, for health insurance, which dominated the first part of the first debate, are pie in the sky, unrealistic. Hillary Clinton also took that line against Bernie. But, Bernie Sanders went to Brooklyn College, which was part of City College of New York that I attended. And up until 1975, which was the second year that I was there, the tuition was absolutely free. Free.
Wow.
So it has existed already. I think in other locations there have been state colleges or city-run, municipally run colleges, systems that were free. So it's happened already. It's not unrealistic. It's all about priorities, isn't it? Where do you want to spend the money?
That's exactly right. It is priority. And of course, the size of the debt, it just strikes me as odd that nobody has picked up in the course of these debates about what the National Banking Institute, Public Banking Institute, the wealth that's created is created by the banks. When people borrow money from the bank, they're creating the money. The money's not created by the government. They just print the money. And so what we need to do is to take that away from the banks, put it in the hands of government, and then the government could just write off all of the debt. All they got to do is print the money, pay back, buy these bonds back, and after they've been purchased back, and of course then they monitor whether or not there's too much money in the system to cause inflation. Right now, this is all done by bankers for the benefit of bankers, not for the people. And of course, when we realize that the last time around, what's his name? Obama and Biden were both passing out billions of dollars to the banks, and people were going broke with their mortgages. Isn't that a priority?
That's the kind of socialism for the 1% you were referring to, isn't it?
That's exactly right.
Collective government action to help the top people, and to bloat that military budget, which, I recall you on the stage when they did let you on in that first debate in South Carolina in 2008. I was sitting in the audience behind Michelle Obama, and what should have been your wife's seat, Mike. You were kind enough to give it to me. And you pointed out that we had no enemies. The United States has no real enemies and doesn't need anywhere near this kind of defense budget.
Oh, if you were to judge who's the most dangerous country in the world, it has to be the United States, because China spends less than 15% of our budget. And Russia spends less than 10% of our budget. Well, who else is, and of course, maybe 2% or 0.5% of North Korea's budget. So who's going to attack us? There's no one going to attack us. So why do we need to spend all of this money? McNamara, when he was Secretary of Defense, was asked, well, how much could we cut the budget and still be safely defending ourselves? He said, you cut it in half, 50%. And so that's what my recommendation is cut the budget in half, and that'll give you about $300 to $400 billion that you can spend on education, healthcare, infrastructure, you name it. That we have our priorities so askew in this democracy says something about the process of democracy that we have.
You'd also
So-
have
Go
You'd
ahead.
also have, at least a few million very, very angry members of the intelligence community by doing that. So it would be a very, very interesting
Well,
proposition.
there's two intelligence communities. There's the one I belong to, which is Ray McGovern et al., and of course the one that John Bolton is involved with in Washington. Ours is the reasonable one. Theirs is not rationale. There's no rationale for this level of expenditure, and what people don't appreciate is that the military have carved up the world so that all parts of the world are covered by a command. This gives more jobs for generals and admirals, which of course, if you're aware that we have more generals and admirals today than we had at the end of the Second World War, when we had over 12 million people under arms. So this is the same old, and it's not necessary. It is not necessary. We can who here. I would in debate asking, well, who is the threat? North Korea? Well, North. We keep our military, our media keeps saying North Korea is a threat to the world. They're not a threat to the world. All they're trying to do is to get nukes so that they can discourage us from regime change. That's the same thing that's going on. Here, most people forgot that we opposed France getting the nuclear capability. And so Charles de Gaulle, this became so heated with the United States that Charles de Gaulle threw NATO out of France. That's when it went to Brussels, and then turned around and withdrew his troops from NATO at the time. And this was all because the United States wouldn't permit France to become a nuclear power. And of course, France felt that if you're going to have a real defensive capability, you got to have nukes. This is the reason why we could turn around and unilaterally. I'm not talking about having to negotiate. Unilaterally cut out the nukes for the Air Force and the Army, leave the nukes for the Navy. And so we've got 12 submarines that have each a capability of 280 warheads. So we could hold the world hostage. And so by unilaterally cutting out those two legs of the triad, then we could ask the UN to call a conference of other nations, all the other nations, plus Japan and Germany and Brazil. And then they would sit down and they would discuss. And of course, we would have been the example. We cut this stuff down at our own volition. We didn't try to negotiate the tit for tat. How ridiculous it is. The military tells us they got to have first strike to scare people. Then they got to have retaliatory strike to get back at them if they. Well, the truth be told is that if anybody of the 9 countries unloads its nuclear capability, it will trigger a nuclear winter, and where the planet will die. So,
well, the militarists have Jake Tapper on their side because he took on one of the candidates for how dare he or she, I can't remember who it was, not support first strike and give the added advantage. I mean, it was just extraordinary. But Mike, you mentioned VIPs before, the Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, and we have with us to speak in the next segment, Bill Binney, former National Security Agency Technical Director. Well, Bill, if you want to come in now, even though you're not due till the next segment, and ask Senator Ravel something, please do so.
Bill, you're great. Your analysis of the fact that it was a thumb drive rather than a hacking job.
Well, that's what we're going to talk about next time. Go on, Bill.
I'm trying to get on here. Do I?
Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity.
Well, I can see you, Bill. I can see you. Nice dark glasses.
Am I on now?
You're on.
Yes, you're on.
Well, Bill, if you want to come in now, even though you're not due till the next segment, and ask Senator Ravel.
Oh, we're getting a little bit of feedback from, I believe, the YouTube video.
Oh, Bill, I just want to point out to you that I'm the oldest VIP member that you have. I had 89, and I had the distinction also of being the oldest person to ever run for president.
Bill, if you want to join us, you're going to have to
Turn
your YouTube video. So while you're doing that, I might want to ask you one more question, Mike. what we were talking about, the idea of threat. It seems to me that it's very difficult to get the American people to understand that it's their government, U.S. government, that is the threat. That it's U.S. troops that are up against NATO troops up against the Russian border, not Russian troops up against the U.S. border. That it's the U.S. that has the first strike policy. That it's U.S. ships that are patrolling near China. That it's encircling Iran with bases. It is not the bad guy. We still live, I think, under the idea of the Second World War, where we were the good guys, or at least on the good side, and that we're still defending democracy. And I think that our leaders have been using that, calling every leader they want to overthrow Hitler. Milosevic was Hitler, Noriega was Hitler, Saddam was Hitler, Hillary called Putin Hitler. That's a sign of getting ready for a regime change, in my view. So it's all about America still being that great generation. Well, that is no longer the case, is it, Mike? We are the threat. That's what people cannot understand. And it's a hard message for a leader, even like Tulsi Gabbard, to get through the American people, because it seems offensive to American people.
Keep in mind that what's going on is this is sustained by the mainstream media, who support the wars and who support the militarism that we have. It's patriotic to turn around and talk about all this, but it's mainstream media, which is owned lock, stock, and barrel by the military-industrial complex and Wall Street. And so they, just the way you saw in the debates when they were trying to get this Tapper guy from CNN, he was a gotcha kind of guy. He was saying that, well, would you raise taxes for to turn around and give people health care? And so he was insisting, now you're going to raise the taxes? Well, the truth be told, it's not a question of just raising taxes. It's a question of the shifting of who's paying. And so if we turn around and have health care for the people and not paid for by their employment, which of course makes their employment uncompetitive in the world, since other people just do it directly. And so this whole thing is a stupid effort by his part to do a gotcha on the various candidates. Boy, I'll tell you, if I'd have been on the stage, I would have said that, hey, Charlie, stop your questioning. You're just trying to tee up the talking points for the Republicans.
Very good. So, Bill, now Bill's muted his YouTube. If you have a question related to the campaign, we're going to leave the leak hack issue to the next segment, if you don't mind.
No, not at all. Not at all.
I was ready to say, congratulations on your age there and the fact that you're the oldest member of the VIPS group. So I'm catching up to you, though.
You got a long way to go. And secondly, I don't have your expertise in the issues of communication and all of that. And your analysis was just awesome. And this analysis was hanging out there for the last 3 years. And would mainstream media pick it up? Would the government pick it up? We had this ridiculous situation with Mueller out there talking about, and the Democrats have bought into this, that the Russians were hacking our election.
Right.
There's such a loss of memory. We paid for Yeltsin's election when he was drunk as a skunk, and we sent over our consultants to manage the election in addition to paying for it. And so, I mean, our ability to twist and turn the facts of life is just unbelievable.
Well, and like you say, when you talk about the mainstream media, it's also our internal government. I mean, nobody in the government, in the House or Senate or the judicial or intelligence committees wanted to hear that any of the testimony that I was prepared to give them, nor did Mueller or anybody. Nobody wanted to hear that, because it was the conventional media and the spreading of the Russiagate issue was the main story, and anything that would undermine it or cut it apart, they just would not let on the air. So that was controlling the narrative so that people couldn't hear any other alternative positions.
And that's proof positive that we don't have a democracy.
That's right.
A democracy that's run by the 1%. And they have a monopoly on lawmaking. And that's what I'm trying to break up by creating a legislature of the people and its operation. I have a book that'll be coming out. The title of the book is going to be The Failure of Representative Government and a Solution, the People.
Yeah.
People are the solution. You just have to equip the people with the ability to make laws. This is the core. The core of governance is law. The core of civilization is law.
Yeah.
And here, the people have been denied by the founding fathers the ability to make laws and amend the Constitution.
Mike, have you discussed that with Tulsi Gabbard? Is she receptive at all to it?
I haven't yet. And I don't know if she, first off, I'm going to really press her on that because she is going to be president. I don't know if she'll get it this time or next time, but she's a person that's got unbelievable staying power. And so she will be president at some point. And of course, if a president were to endorse this effort to create a legislature of the people so people could make laws parallel to the lawmaking of representative government, now you've got a system of government by the people, which we've never had. We've had of and for, but never by the people. And that's what this is all about.
Of course, your critics also say, like they say to Bernie and Elizabeth, that that's a pie in the sky, unrealistic issue, except it exists already. And what, 24 states have
they do. In other
initiatives.
Do. What they're saying is that the people are not competent enough to self-govern themselves. That's what they're saying. And I think when we can respond to that rhetoric and say that, hey, the people are competent, what you got to do is give them the tools to exercise that competence. And so what will happen is right now, the people don't vote, or if they do, they don't have interest in it. And for the very simple reason that they vote, nothing happens. They vote again, nothing happens. And so it's just an exercise of futility. And so people just walk away and hell, I'm not going to mess with politics. I'm going to concentrate on my life, my family, and improve that. And so it's what I call the Chinese model. China is the only nation in the history of civilization that has moved 500 million people from 500 million people from poverty to middle class. Now that is bringing about a lot of freedom. And of course, we criticize them. Well, of course, they've got an autocratic government. Well, we do too. So what's new, Charlie?
Well, I always look back at the quote from Goethe, and I always try to mention this on the air, is that he said that, no one is more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they're free. And that's us.
Not only that, then let's use the quote from Cicero. And that is that, I'm having a senior moment. That freedom is participation in power.
Yeah.
And of course, the power to make laws is absolute. And so we don't make laws, so we don't have freedom, according to Cicero.
Yep.
Well, with that, I think we're going to move on to our next segment, and that is our interview with Kim.com.
I have to pull off there, Joe.
Yeah.
But I wanted to get on, and I just think you're doing such a fabulous job with the Consortium News. You really have brought this front and center, and you got a lot of imaginations. You got the assistance of Elizabeth. You're literally on a full-time basis. On your success. Period.
On second thought, we'll keep you on for about an hour to keep going on that theme about Consortium News, and we'll keep Kim till next week.
We're gonna be able to contribute some serious money because we have the ability to. I got David.
Maybe that's Joe Biden calling you now to complain. Well, thank you, Mike, and we will see you again soon. Bye-bye.
David.
Fantastic.
I'm muted. That was Senator Mike Ravel. Sorry, Elizabeth. That was Senator Mike Ravel talking to us from Seaside, California about the debate. So we're going to move now on to the segment of Kim.com, who I interviewed in his home in Queenstown, New Zealand, some months ago. And this is a good opportunity now for us to air a section of what was a 4-hour interview with Kim. But we're going to play about 50 minutes of him talking on two issues that came up over the last two shows. And that is the leaking or hacking of the Democratic National Committee and Podesta emails and how they were transferred to WikiLeaks. Of course, the issue of Set the Rich arose because of Michael Isikoff and his series at Yahoo News. That was a story nobody was talking about. Suddenly, he made an issue out of it. So we brought him on, and I think we dismantled his story. He may have been more aggressive than I was and more arrogant. But I think if you look at what happened, we showed that Russia did not initiate that idea whatsoever. Even the Washington Post had already destroyed that notion. And he hadn't seen the actual Russian intelligence document, et cetera, et cetera. So we talked to Kim. So it's before the Mueller report came out when I spoke to him, but it's still very, very relevant. He's talking about who may have leaked the emails to WikiLeaks, how that happened, and what role Kim.com played in that. Are we ready to roll that, Ebon? Okay, so let us know when it's rolling, please.
Bill Binney says they have the evidence of if Russia indeed hacked the DNC.
Of course, which is the biggest joke, really, that whole story.
For them to have blamed Russia for Hillary Clinton's own horrible campaign.
They lost because they cheated with Bernie Sanders, you know. They completely rigged the whole process. And that is also why these leaks took place, not because of some Russian hack. It was actually a DNC insider who was a Bernie supporter who saw what was happening, the manipulation that took place, and said, I can't accept this. You know, and that is how the information ultimately ended up with WikiLeaks. It wasn't a Russian hack.
This person reached out to you, is that what I understand?
Yeah. The way that happened is I formed a political party in New Zealand called the Internet Party. And in an interview, I think it was with Bloomberg or somebody else, I announced that we will have an Internet Party in the United States. And when that story came out in the United States, I was approached by a young gentleman over Twitter with the Twitter handle Panda something, and told me that he's working with the Democratic Party and he's fed up with what's going on in the United States, and he read about my Internet Party and he would be interested to talk with me. And then I took that straight into an encrypted channel where we chatted about what's going on, and we had a few back and forth, and he told me that he has information that would be quite shocking if it was made public. He believed that there's massive corruption going on within the DNC. He was very concerned about voter fraud, that tools are being misused and voter fraud. And so I said, look, this is all very interesting, but I was in the middle of my case, and I was involved in this massive fight against the United States. So I did not want to be the recipient of any of that information. So what I did, I put him in touch with someone that I know is in the data security space, that is very knowledgeable and has worked with WikiLeaks in the past. And I simply established the contact between that person and this person, and everything that happened after that is what we now know as the DNC leak/hack. The experts agree that based on the data that has been analyzed, that it cannot have been downloaded, that it was uploaded onto an external device, something like a USB stick or USB drive, and that is proven in the metadata of the files. That cannot be manipulated. So it clearly shows that these files that then made their way to WikiLeaks cannot have been originated from a download, a hack, right? And that is really, I think Binney was one of the ones that was working on that.
Yeah, I've met with Bill about that. He's explained a lot.
I do believe that there was an intrusion component. Intrusion meaning that someone has opened the door to DNC servers. Because if you can plug in a USB device and download all these files, then obviously you can also upload something onto the server that will open a door for more analysis, for more data to be retrieved. I would think that is the logical thing of what happened, that at first this data set of DNC files that made it to WikiLeaks, which are clearly not downloaded but uploaded onto an external device, made it to WikiLeaks. And then what followed were the hacks of email accounts, which I think are also linked to the DNC servers, because those email accounts were independent of the DNC servers. Can you follow me? Because Podesta's email was a Gmail account. Yeah. So how do you get to the point from actual data grabbed from DNC servers onto an external device to having access now to emails of people that are operating within the DNC, like Podesta? And I would think the most logical way to achieve that is that the person who downloaded all the files onto this, let's call it a memory stick, has also provided a means of access to that same server to an external party, which would then have used the access to identify documents or files that are relevant to the operators within the DNC, the leadership, and then used one of those files to modify the content so that it will install a backdoor on that person's computer. Because that's what you do. If you get a PDF file that has been modified and you click on it, you basically open a door to your machine, to the person who sent you that file. So, for example, if you create an email address that looks almost the same as the one that you are used to getting emails from, with just one letter changed or a number changed or something, and you receive something and there is a document attached that you already know that has been part of a previous exchange, let's say a draft for a speech, and now you get the latest draft from that fake email that looks almost identical to the one that you're used to, and then you click on that, and here you are. Your email is completely compromised, and the attacker can get into your account and download your entire email history. And I believe that is what happened, because once you are in the DNC server, you can see what documents they were working on. Because the staff within the DNC that was writing emails to the leadership, they stored their documents all on those servers. So now you have a completely different way of trying to Trojanize somebody's email account or their computer even, And I think that is what took place. So in a first step, the data was copied onto a third-party device, like a memory stick. And in a second step, it's logical to assume that the same person has then provided some kind of backdoor access, remote access into that server for further analysis to see how can we now take this access that we have and turn it into something bigger by getting into the email inboxes of the leaders of this organization.
So it was not a phishing expedition.
No, it was a very targeted. It was not accidental.
Yeah.
It was a very targeted operation by fooling the recipient by receiving something that he has already seen, right, that he is used to from a person that an email address that he recognizes.
This is your conjecture.
It's the logical thing, because what I do know for sure is that it was a DNC insider that opened that door.
And it's the same one that you had the encrypted conversation with.
Yes.
Did he say that he did that?
No,
Or
he never said it. I never asked.
yeah. Now, you know, Craig Murray, the former British ambassador to Uzbekistan, who has relations with WikiLeaks and with Assange, says the person who did it had legal access to these emails. Now, in the first
Not
case...
the emails. though.
Not the emails.
Not the emails. Because, see, the emails are not stored on the DNC servers. Podesta used Gmail.
But the others used a DNC.
Well, but Podesta is the one
Right.
that was leaked that had the big impact on everyone, right?
Because the speeches were in there. Yeah.
And everything, the email exchanges with Hillary Clinton,
Yeah.
you know, basically the whole roadmap of how to derail Sanders and you know, all of that was in there. And that was a targeted attack, not a default phishing operation where you try and get somebody. And you could target it because you had the DNC files. If you did not have those, you couldn't have done that targeted attack. You would be fishing in the dark and trying to get someone to do something who may be educated about how these attacks are happening and may be aware not to open emails from strangers that he doesn't know, and not to click on attachments that may be suspicious. But if it's a third draft of a speech that he's already seen twice from an email address that looks identical, where an I was changed to a lowercase l, still looks like an I, to your I, when you read it in the sender field, it looks identical. You click on the attachment, and at that moment you're doomed. Your data is open to the attacker. That's how simple this is.
Do you have any ideas about how the files were transferred to WikiLeaks?
It is apparent from the analysis of the metadata that it was copied onto a memory stick.
And then? Was that memory stick humanly passed over through messengers, perhaps?
Perhaps, but I wouldn't know the answer to that
Yeah.
because I wasn't involved in that.
All right, we're back here live with Bill Binney, the National Security Agency former technical director. And Bill has just listened, as the rest of us have, to that first of 3 sections of the interview I did with Kim.com. So, Bill, if you could first unmute your mic or have someone unmute it. Your general, yeah, Bill, you're on now.
All right.
I'm just going to throw it out there because there's a lot of technical stuff in there, and that's why we have you here.
Okay.
I brought up the Craig Murray thing because Craig said they had legal access to it. He was saying no, just on that point. But in general, do you agree with what Kim is saying here as a likely scenario?
Yeah, certainly that's a highly likely one of the more likely ones than others. Yeah. I see. I'm not a hacker, so I don't I don't play into hacking. But I'm a cryptologist. I look at data and data systems and codes and things like that. So when
we should have had a former NSA hacker on, non-technical director. But anyway, go on.
They won't come out of the active attack area and talk to anybody. So
I'm sure.
But at any rate, when I looked at the data, the DNC data came down in 3 batches, right? One on looking at the last modified time, which is what we were doing with the DNC data. It came in 3 batches, one dated the 23rd of May, one the 25th of May, and one the 26th of August. Now, if we're assuming that what Kim was saying, that Seth Rich was the original hacker or the guy getting into the data in the DNC, then he could have passed the 23 and 25 May material, but somebody else did the 26th August. So that was basically saying he was not alone in this. And then the later data coming out on 21 September clearly showed there was no fat property there. So it was a hack or somebody getting into the system and and taking it out probably directly. Whereas the other two, with the FAT format, the 23, 25 May, and 26 August were clearly downloaded to a memory stick, a thumb drive, whatever you want to call it. So,
like I say, I wanted to bring Elizabeth in here because she knows this story better than I do. But what documents are you talking about? Just to lay the basics out here. Which ones did you analyze? As in your VIPS analysis, was it just the Guccifer 2.0 document of Trump opposition research, resistant research piece on Trump done by the Democrats? Or did you also look at actually some of these DNC and or Podesta emails, the metadata there? Were you able to get to those?
Is that to me?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, we actually looked at Guccifer 2. Now, Guccifer 2 is a totally different story. This guy is a total fake. He was manufactured, and we can prove this by any number. I mean, not just the transfer rate times and the speed. It wasn't possible to be attacked across the web. But also, and this came from Duncan Campbell, he first spotted some of this. And so if you looked at the two data sets that Guccifer 2 put out there for everybody to look at, saying, here, I hacked everybody. Well, if you looked at him, his big mistake was putting all the data out there. And when you look closely at it, you could look at it came down as a series of data files with timestamps at the end of each file. So you could see a data set, timestamp, and so on. And so you could, by subtracting the difference between the time, you could calculate the speed of transfer because you have the number of characters and everything there. So each file, you had character strikes and you had the time difference. So you could say, this is the speed. But also, it lined up everything in the two files in relative time order. Now, when you did that and ignored only hour and day, those two files using minutes, seconds, and milliseconds merged like a deck of cards with no conflict. Now, the random probability, being a mathematician, random probability of that happening is exceedingly low. Just like the probability of FAT format not being used on the DNC emails, like, is 1 in chance in 2 to the 35,816th power. So it's exceedingly small. So that says that Guccifer 2 was playing with the data. He actually had one data set, split it into two, and did a range change on the date and the hour in one, and then claimed he had two hacks. Well, it means he's playing with the data and he's playing with us. And the fact that he came out shortly after, I think, Julian Assange announced he had data on the DNC, it was a diversion. This was a manufactured diversion. And that the guy, and the timestamps that were coming from Forensicator and Adam Carter showed or implied that this person was in the East Coast of the United States, most likely. They also had timestamps for the West Coast, one, I think, and something in the Central Time.
Right.
But it was in the US. And so if you looked at it and thought about that for a minute, gee, this really circles back to things like, and the modifications of some of the files using some of the techniques that came out in the Vault 7 stuff from CIA, to me implied, and all of this seemed to imply anyway, this entire story, that the source of this manufactured person was CIA, and that probably the designer of the entire program was Brennan. And so when I was talking to Director Pompeo, this was the other major point. I mean, we were putting out this stuff through Consortium News, your publications, and various others. I forget what the one it was that you were involved in.
Disobedient Media, yes.
Disobedient Media, yeah, that's it.
Right.
Coming out with that, with the Forensicators publications and so on. The president told Director Pompeo that if he wanted to find out facts about Russiagate, he needed to talk to me. So I got invited to talk to him in October of 2017. So I went in there up on the 7th floor of CIA building, and one of the main things I told him, I said, your agency and every intelligence community agency is lying to you and the president. Because after all, if you don't have any facts, I mean, my God, and here I've got facts. Just looking at open source, and you have all this access points, and you have a view into every fiber in the world, and you're collecting the data off all of them using the Neris and Barrett devices, sessionizing everything and storing it. How can you miss this? You know, that was my original reason for doubting the story about Russiagate in August of 2016, because the way they were talking about it, you know, if NSA had moderate confidence in the ICA, well, the reason they did is because they didn't have anything to work with. So that meant it wasn't a hack immediately. And that's what I picked on the way they were phrasing their confidence of Russiagate back in August of 2016. I mean, if NSA had the data, if you know anything about the TCP/IP packet format and forwarding system and how the network works, you know, right up front is the numbers telling you this is the packet series. Like if your email got busted into 50 packets, each of the 50 packets would start out with this number. That's how they reassemble it, you know, at the other end. So, and then after that are the IP addresses, IPv4 and IPv6 addresses of the devices where it originated from and where it ends up in the world. So you can basically, just one packet is all you need of any transmission, and you know exactly where it came from and where it went, because that's the only way the switches in the world know how to pass data. If you start messing with that data, your probability of getting your message to the right, or their packets to the right point to be reassembled, is getting lower and lower the more you make those changes. And you'd have to know the border gate protocol of every service provider along the way to make sure that they weren't changing things either, you know, and that to me is only available with the governments. I don't see as individuals knowing all of that kind of information to be able to do that. So any transmission should have been picked up by NSA, and they should have had no doubt whatsoever and said it started from here and it went over there, you know. But when they didn't, and when they were starting this, well, we have high confidence kind of statements and all of that, that's not the kind of thing that comes out of NSA. If NSA says anything, they have it, period. And so that was the original way I started saying this is not right.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, one of the things that I've noticed in the year and months since the forensic errors analysis came out, since the VIPS memo from 2017 came out, is that a lot of people, whether it's in independent media or the public, have kind of conflated that study of Goose for Two's data and publications with the potential source of WikiLeaks. And I know that you did recently, like earlier this year, both you and Larry Johnson and Adam Carter both did a separate study of the DNC email. And there was, you know, I'd like to ask you about that further along, maybe after the next segment. But basically, I just want to confirm for our audience's sake, who don't understand the technical details to the extent you do, of course, that what we're talking about when you talk about Goose for Two is totally separate. The NGP van files totally separate to WikiLeaks source and has no bearing on confirming Seth Rich or anybody else as the source of WikiLeaks. What it does do, and what it does do, it seems, is it debunks the Russian hacking narrative that was based on the claim that Goose for Two, this persona, was responsible for breaching the DNC servers. So it discounts a narrative, but it doesn't confirm a narrative, if that makes sense. Is
yeah,
that
but
right?
It also implies that there's an internal conspiracy that Goose for Two is created within the government of the United States. And you could see that coming out because they used that Goose for Two as one of the main reasons for the Rosenstein indictment of 12 Russian GRU agents. I said, gee, here's our government, charging spies with being spies, you know. And so I thought, well, we spy on everybody in the world. So, hey, is everybody in the world going to charge our spies with being spies? I thought that was a totally insane, charge from the DOJ. So I thought, they should get a brain, because they aren't thinking straight. But at any rate, it was a false foundation. It means this indictment is a false indictment.
And we still see Goose for Two invoked in the Mueller report. We still hear that tired narrative. So that's why it was so significant that you produced this memo in 2017 and addressed that so early. But I think it has been unfortunate that people seem to not really understand what that was actually referring to, and the really significant implications of it. But that were kind of misunderstood by some people. So thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, but see, the mainstream media and these the people who are subverting our Constitution and laws really depend on the mainstream media to spread out this disinformation and repeat it over and over again, so that it becomes automatically absorbed by a good portion of the population, and they don't challenge it, and they just say, well, everybody's saying it, so it must be true, and they keep saying it over and over. So obviously, this has got to be true. It's an old sophistic technique that comes out from ancient Greece. Okay, and nothing has changed. People do the same thing. They've not really changed that much. I mean, that's basically how you can fundamentally get into a lot of codes and ciphers. You get to understand the data system, how they organize things and stuff like that, and you know the history and development over time. You basically are in their minds on how they do things, and it's not. It's a great asset to be able to say, oh, this is the way they do it, so this is the way I'm going, and you usually go directly at the solution and you can get it right away. But along the way, you have to keep your mind open so you can see different aspects that might contradict what you're doing, and you have to adjust to them. If you don't adjust, now that's the problem with a lot of the cryptologists at NSA today. They don't adjust. In fact, they just sit and wait for people to make mistakes. That's a big failure of them now. I mean, even in World War II, when they had the Enigma device, that was all provided by the Polish intelligence, mathematicians again, who had broken the system based on having the equipment to begin with. So that was a lot of that story isn't really told correctly, but the real I think the real breaks though were done by some of our people on the naval codes for the Japanese and the purple codes. They were code systems, not ciphers. So. But they were broken by a lot of our people. We did a lot of good work. Actually, I knew some people who did that. So
absolutely. No, and I think one of the unfortunate, in very simplistic terms, it seems to me that a lot of people hear that phrase, that soundbite, leak versus hack, and they automatically apply that to the DNC emails in terms of what WikiLeaks published. They don't understand they're two separate leak versus hack studies. So. Sure.
Okay, I think we're going to move on to segment 2 of Kim.com. But Bill, when we get you back, we're going to ask you. Let me just ask you now. You did look at DNC emails as well. Goes for 2, and that's where you saw the file allocation table number 32, which you say can only be apparent in metadata when it was a download to a thumb drive. Could not be an external hack.
That was true for the first 3 batches of DNC emails, the 23 and 25 May and 26 August. The 21 September emails that WikiLeaks published did not show the FAT format. Yeah.
And that's another interesting point you made. An important one is that Assange had already said that he had possession of emails. And then Guccifer appears. So very suspicious.
I call it the Wizard of Oz game. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Look over here.
Right.
So everybody was supposed to look at Guccifer too.
Well, I'm glad that you look behind the curtain, Bill. And are we ready, Ebon, to roll part 2 of my interview with Kim.com? Okay, let's do that.
Right?
Yeah.
So he has this extremely interesting interview with Cassandra Fairbanks. You may have seen it. And I heard this from someone who gave me some more details. That someone well-known in New York, an activist, went to see Julian in London, as she often did, and took a message back from Julian from the embassy to bring to the Seth Rich family. And this woman was friends with Ed Butowski and asked Ed to do it. And he found the Rich family. And he rang them up to tell them what Assange had said, and that basically that your son had been responsible for this. And he says that they said, we know this already. We know what he did, but we don't want anybody to talk about this because we don't want to malign his name. We don't want to get in trouble. Shut up about it.
Look, there's a lot of speculation about what went on because there was also a financial component to this whole thing. Now, I don't understand that any money has ever changed hands. I wouldn't know about this, but it would be a potential motive why they are so aggressively fighting any kind of publication about Seth's involvement in this. And they asked me as well to cease any release of any information. And then when I honored that and I said I would only speak to a US representative if certain guarantees are provided that I'm safe and my family is safe. Only under those circumstances would I provide the information. And then the rich family attacked me on that. So I followed their suggestion by their lawyers saying to me, this is what we would like you to do. We followed that, and then they kept attacking me anyway. So to me, it was very, very suspicious how they have dealt with anyone who was trying to shed some light on this. And if you read between the lines and you see how they react to things, and also their relationships, that the fact that this guy Berman gets involved, who is really a PR person for the DNC and now runs the whole communication strategy and defense and basically stifles any kind of conversation about this topic. The fact that the family allowed that guy to get involved when there was some, at the very least, if I was the parent of Seth Rich, I would be saying, well, this whole robbery story just doesn't add up. They didn't take anything. They had ample time, after he was shot, just to take his watch or take a wallet or whatever, it just didn't add up. And then when he got to the hospital, based on the reports that did later leak, he wasn't fatally shot. There was an eyewitness report from someone who was in the OR. I think it was a teaching hospital, and this guy was like a visiting doctor, and he wrote an account about what happened, and he was basically operated on and released into his room. And everyone who was operating on him, everyone who did this work on him, was sure that he was going to survive. And then all of a sudden, he was moved from his normal hospital room into a special unit of the hospital that's like locked off for special cases, and then he died. These are things that made it into the public domain, and a lot of people have been investigating what happened to Seth Rich from the time that he left the bar where he had a drink that night, and on the way home, on the phone with his girlfriend, and, every minute of what happened. And then another very striking thing about this case, right? In the US, especially in Washington, D.C., almost every road corner has a camera. Either business-operated cameras or police cameras. And one investigator found that on that route, from him leaving the bar to where he was shot, there were 23 cameras. But none of the footage was ever used or surfaced or requested by anybody. And when you think about this, when you are the DC police, and you are investigating a murder, why would you not knock on the door of every house that had a camera on the path that Seth took and get their footage? These private investigators knocked at all these doors and said, no one ever asked us for the footage. That is very unusual in a homicide investigation. Wouldn't you agree?
If there really was a true investigation, because the FBI
Exactly.
took it over.
Exactly. Well, I wouldn't say that I know that, but what I do know, based on the information that other investigators have found, is that there was no proper investigation into the killing of Seth Rich. And the question is why? Why not? What is there to hide? Why is this not being properly investigated like any other murder case?
How did the DNC, you think, discover that Rich was the one who had...
Look, I have
downloaded
no
emails?
idea, and I honestly don't even know what happened, what led to his death. We can all just speculate. All that I do know from all the evidence that is now out there is that it wasn't properly investigated.
Yeah, well, I think that's for sure, and we'll never know, probably, who killed him. Seymour Hersh now I talked to the guy, former CIA guy, who put Butovsky in touch with Hirsch.
That was a very interesting recording.
Yes.
I listened to that.
Yes.
And I mean, you can ask any psychologist. This guy was recalling conversations that he had, opinions that he heard from people that were involved with this. And you don't make this stuff up on the fly in a phone call the way he did, especially when you are a credible journalist that has won
That's right.
a Pulitzer, hasn't he?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So
Broken some of the biggest stories in the last 30, 40 years.
So you would expect that someone like that is not pulling out of his ass spontaneously these types of serious allegations, and then to his own reputation, the effect that it had, the NATO saying that's all wrong, never said that, and then the recordings come out and he sticks by his guns and says, I never said this. You wonder what was going on in the background that led to him changing his position in this way.
I have some insight that I got from this former CIA guy who's
Okay.
friends with Tsai and Butovsky.
Okay.
Put them together, and what he
Yeah.
told me. And actually, I contacted Hirsch when this came out, because I wrote a couple of stories about this for Consortium News when before I was the editor. And I contacted Tsai, is this your voice? Yes, those clowns, this was email, those clowns down in Texas, they recorded me without telling me. That's all he would say to me. Yes, it's my voice, but those clowns in Texas, meaning Butovsky, didn't tell me I was being recorded. What my CIA guy told me is that Tsai does stand by what he said, but that the release of that recording dried up all of his sources. He was still working on the story. That's why he was so pissed off at Butovsky. Because I've often wondered, why isn't he writing something about many people? Why isn't he going to write something about this? From his FBI source, who says that they have the computer, they analyzed it, because the release of that tape screwed up the investigation of the story.
Yeah.
That's why he was pissed off. But what Tsai does say on that tape is that the FBI has the computer and that Rich emailed these documents and emails to WikiLeaks. Would that be possible? To compress files
Yeah.
of that size
Yeah.
into emails?
And the metadata of the files wouldn't be changed. So you can take the files off the memory stick, copy them onto your computer, and pack them into a zip file
Right.
and email the zip file. The metadata of the files inside the zip file would still be the metadata that includes the original copying from the DNC
I see.
onto a memory stick. That is how
Binney found out about this.
how this group of experts could
Yeah.
do the forensic
The VIPs.
analysis on the data.
That was published on the so-called Guccifer 2.0's
Yeah.
blog.
By the way, let me be very clear. I have never been involved in either putting Panda in touch with WikiLeaks directly or any submissions of any files whatsoever. And given my own situation, under indictment, under surveillance, on bail, I did not want to do anything that can affect my own situation and my family situation, right? So all I did is really put a guy in touch with another guy, and they took it from there.
Well, I missed the last few minutes because my power went out. I believe Joe right now is muted somehow, and I'm trying to unmute him. But in any
I'm
case,
here.
I wanted to say that I didn't hear the last 5 to 10 minutes that happened. So you may have to clue me in a little bit. But.
Well, did you hear that he was talking about Sethrich having walked in an area with a lot of surveillance cameras? Did you hear
Yes, I
that
did
part?
hear that. Yes.
And Bill, can you pick it up from there? And what did you make of what he had to say?
Well, he was talking also about the metadata, how if you read it down to a stick, the metadata would be on the stick. And if you took it and tried to transmit it across different places or upload it to your own computer, the metadata would still be the same as like, for example, the FAT format. When that property showed up, that FAT property would show all the way through when you upload it into your next system. That's why it showed up in the WikiLeaks posting of the data from the DNC because it didn't change the metadata in the process.
Right. Bill, do you have any other comments on what he's saying now? Do you, he was saying in the next segment, we're going to hear him talk more specifically about Seth Rich by name and his communications with and what Assange had to say about Rich. But what is your, one thing I wanted to point out, by the way, in this audio interview that was done before Patowski last week in a lawsuit named Ellen Ratner as this woman. In the interview, I don't name her because I had been told who she was off the record. But now we all know that Ratner went to London, saw Assange, came back, told Patowski to pass a message from Assange to the Rich family. Patowski contends the Rich family said, "We know all about it. Shut up. We don't want anybody to hear about this." Of course, they have denied that and then sued Fox News and Patowski. And by the way, that lawsuit was thrown out last year. It failed. So they weren't able to prove that, in fact, Patowski was lying. My contention is somebody's lying here because Ellen Ratner then, a video emerged of her that we played last week in which she confirms that she saw Assange and he told her, he being Assange, told Ratner that it was a Democratic insider who leaked it, although the name Seth Rich was never mentioned. She says in her interview with Isikoff on the Yahoo series that she'd never heard of the name Seth Rich until later on. So somebody is not telling the truth here. Either the family is lying to protect their memory of their son and not to be bothered by this, or Patowski's lying, or Kim is lying here. So can you piece this together in any way?
I think from my point of view, there's one specific piece of evidence that is not being really talked about that much. And that is the FOIA request by Ty Clevenger, the lawyer for Ed Bukowski, to NSA for any data they had for Seth Rich communications with, a series of people, Julian Assange, Kim.com, a number of members of related to WikiLeaks, and I think they said any foreigners or something. And the problem is it was too large a thing. Yeah. But the answer came back from NSA, and this is in writing. It's on the web, and it says that we have 32 pages of 15 different files for that meet your FOIA request, but they are properly classified under Executive Order 13526, and we can't give them to you. So what that says is, in the intelligence community, and I'm basically a fundamental believer that NSA told them only about probably in the order of 1% of what they knew. So I think they're lying too in this FOIA answer, which is not untypical of them. So I think there's a lot more there than meets the eye. And this is something the president has given the Attorney General Barr the authority to declassify. And that's something he should do. All right, and he needs to go back at them, not just at the 15 articles, 32 pages, but also everything else they've got. And so that's one of the fundamental things he should do.
We showed that letter last week when we had Patowski on. We also discussed it briefly. But my first question is, I've done FOIAs, and they usually give you the Globar response, which we cannot confirm or deny what you're asking exists. Is it surprising that they went as far as to say that there are?
There
are 15 documents? I mean, I was surprised that they would even say that.
Yeah. Well, that may be a slip, because even at NSA, they make the left hand doesn't necessarily know what the right's doing. And so it depends on who you hit with the FOIA as to what they say. My wife used to work in the FOIA office over there, so I know some of this inside story stuff. So, they have standard answers, but it depends on who you hit as to whether or not they give you any more. So if and they don't have really good control and governance over what they're doing in there anyway. So.
Now, what you pointed out was the mistake they made was to cast too wide a net. They had too many people in it. There's one friend of Seth Rich's, I can't remember, that he may have communicated with a friend. But if it were just that friend and not Kim.com, not Assange, not the Pakistani brothers who worked for W. Wasserman Schultz. They were thrown in there, I guess, for good measure. If it was just this friend, would they say, yes, we have it, and they're innocuous emails?
This was where Seth Rich was one end of the communication.
Yeah.
And the other end was a foreigner. Is his friend in a foreign land? If not, then he would not be included in the return.
And how would it be classified, to the point that they would not share that information if it was just to his friend or totally innocuous? How can they get away with classifying it? So is that something we can take away more firmly than
Yes.
interpreting this as if it's proof that Seth Rich spoke with WikiLeaks, which clearly it is not definitively proof of that?
Well, no, but see, anything of that nature would fit the criteria under Executive Order 13526, Section 1.7. And I keep pointing this out. This section says you cannot classify, maintain classified, or not declassify anything that's evidence of a crime, corruption, fraud, waste, abuse, embarrassment to a person, or embarrassment to an agency. You can't classify it for any of those reasons. Just you can't hide that kind of activity is what it's saying. And so if this is in fact what's going on, that's evidence of a crime.
Well, the crime would have been committed by Seth Rich, so it wouldn't protect him. This is about government crimes, correct?
Well, I mean, the crime would be committed by, could be committed by all involved, depending on what's said there, or what's sent in email or whatever. You'd have to follow the evidence to see who was involved in committing a crime.
And I mean, unlike, in the case of Chelsea Manning and the material that she leaked, obviously that was classified material. But when we're talking about the DNC and Podesta emails, especially, the DNC emails, obviously those are not classified. So although...
Can I add one here?
Yeah, absolutely. Please do.
Because when you look at the Collateral Murder movie, that's evidence of a war crime. That can't be classified.
Absolutely.
That has to be declassified, according to the regulation.
Definitely. No, but I guess what I'm trying to say or ask about is how can they portray those documents, those communications as classifiable when the information itself is not classified government material?
Here's the difference with NSA. Everything NSA does is classified.
Okay.
This is automatic. There is nothing that they do that isn't classified, except in personnel and any kind of relationship with the public. They have a whole set of people that do that in terms of public relations and hiring and things of that nature. But anything they do in terms of collection of data or information in communications or between people or between machines with radar or telemetry of things of that nature, why they classify that. That's automatically classified.
So if they intercepted a private conversation between Seth Rich and an American friend in U.S. soil, that would be illegal, first of all, correct? Without a warrant.
That's happening all the time on
right.
all.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to say.
The Stellar Wind program, and
right.
As long as they keep that behind the secret door, you're not supposed to know that's happening, Joe.
That's what I was going to say next. That's why they maybe included him in there. I mean, they didn't exclude him, rather, saying, well, we don't have him, he's an American citizen. They just put him in the whole group and said, we have these files, we just don't know who Rich spoke with. And that's the problem here. We don't know whether he spoke with Kim Dotcom, whether he spoke with Assange, whether he spoke to those Pakistanis working for Wasserman Schultz, or he just spoke to his friend.
However,
However,
the Attorney General can get to that.
Will he?
Well, that's the question. The question is the Attorney General going to start issuing referrals to grand juries for indictments? If he does, then then you can be assured he's trying to do the right thing to help clean up the Department of Justice and the FBI and all of that.
And you have faith in Bill Barr, who was former CIA himself, not to protect the CIA?
I have hope. Well, I mean, the CIA shouldn't be protected, nor should NSA. NSA is like at the center point of this. They're the ones that control the information that everybody uses. The CIA has direct access to the NSA database for queries. I mean, so does the FBI and the DEA. All of those agencies look into this NSA data for criminal activity, even the IRS, because they're a part of this operation too. They're looking in there. They're supposed to be looking at it for, tax evasion and money laundering and things of that nature. But They do a lot more than that, like go after the Tea Party with this kind of information.
So Bill, this is a really big question. If Bill Barr has that information, he gets it from the NSA, and it shows that Seth Rich had communicated with Assange, and there's proof there. Do you think that actually could become public if they're serious about getting to the bottom of this? And
sure, it's under Executive Order 13526, Section 1.7, he can declassify.
Trump can declassify and have proof, if there is proof, that Seth Rich communicated with Assange. I mean, this is extraordinary. If it's true, and they go that far to make it finally public, this information that would prove that it was Seth Rich, just might be our best hope ever of ever finding out whether it was Seth Rich or not.
And the extent of it goes even further than that, because now he should be asking also for how many unmaskings were done, like in the last X number of years, by anybody in the Obama administration. That could also give him the keys to where to go as a follow-up.
Right. That could ensnare, let's say, Susan Rice, who's been alleged to have done that. I think even Samantha Powell maybe somehow had a hand in that. But back to Rich, if Barr really wants to get this out, and Trump really wants to finally declassify this stuff, if in fact there is evidence of Assange-Rich communication, the NSA would have that. Yep. It would be included in that 15 documents, 32 pages, and that could be made declassified and made public, and the world might know that Seth Rich did this, and then we would be an extraordinary explosive story. It wouldn't destroy it wouldn't be this excuse we can't reveal stuff about the JFK assassination because the country can't handle it. This is a partisan issue as well. So for partisan reasons, they would want maybe the country to know that Seth Rich did this. It wouldn't be like just hurting the whole country. It would be vindication, unbelievable for Trump, wouldn't it?
Yep. Yeah. Well, I don't see I think the President Trump wants to get to this and get to the bottom of it. So I am hopeful that this will occur.
Wait, so you don't think he is, or you do think he is?
No, I do think he is.
Oh, you do?
I do. Yeah. And I think, like you, I think it's important for us to clear this up so that we don't keep trying to create a conflict between us and Russia.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, that's insane,
Dangerously insane.
Yeah.
Are we ready, Ebon? If you don't have another question, we can go on to the next segment.
Yeah, moving on will be fine. Yeah.
Okay, Ebon, can you prepare the next segment of my interview with Kim.com? This is the third and final segment.
I've seen your tweets where you say, I know Seth Rich was.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a fact.
Thank you.
It's not like something new, but
it's not made up. It's not some story, It's
dangerously insane.
So
you can mute Bill.
I'm pretty sure, just like with everything else that has to do with me, the U.S. government knows very well that this is true because they have access to Twitter direct messages, And even though I deleted it after contact with him and moving the conversation onto an encrypted platform, Twitter never deletes anything. Like even if you as a user choose to delete a private message, they still keep it on their servers. So it's very easy for them.
Do you have a copy of your encrypted discussion?
No. And I destroyed everything on that computer after I had those conversations.
But you can't destroy anything. They can go in there and find anything on a hard drive.
Well, I mean, of course, after the raid and everything that happened, first of all, there are encrypted platforms on which you can communicate that are safe. And if you don't use a Windows operating system, but let's say a Linux operating system that you strip down to the bare bones and you only use the communication tools that are open source that are known to be safe, you are fine. And I created a laptop just for those communications. And on top of that, I was running something that is known as a virtual machine. So every time I would use it for communications, I would wipe the virtual machine, and the next time I get on, it's all as fresh, as new as it was when I set it up, without any log or any file remaining on that machine. And even when all of that was done, when I felt like this is maybe a trap or something, I just completely wiped that machine and threw the hard drive into the fireplace. So I didn't want there to be anything that could be used.
Now, your communications with the family, how did that take place? Over these encrypted?
No, that was just per email, just on
Just
Gmail.
emails?
Yeah.
So they asked you to not talk about this?
Yeah. They suggested a way forward. Send what you have to the government, send what you have
Oh, they did say
to our...
that.
They said,
Oh, and you sent that letter?
Yeah.
But they're not interested, the government. They don't want to
Yeah,
know.
exactly. So they suggested how to take things forward, and I thanked them, and I said, okay, that's exactly what I will do.
So if a miracle happened and the Department of Justice said, we want to talk to you about Seth Rich, you're able to do that?
Yeah.
They'd be okay with that?
Yeah.
You know,
That offer is still on the table.
Yeah.
That has never changed, and
you have no doubt, you're 100% certain.
yeah,
The DNC
the DNC
files, yes.
and I believe the DNC access, which led to an email being created that Podesta clicked on and that allowed the attacker to infiltrate.
You think was Rich?
I think Seth would have needed some support, someone he trusted, in order to do everything the way he did. You know, I don't think that he would have been capable of doing that just by himself. Because you need to know where to plug this thing in, you need to know what command to type in. He may have gotten the instructions from the person that I put him in touch with, but I don't know, I can just speculate, you know. And I think if I was Seth, I wouldn't have trusted the person I put him in touch with, you know. So I would have looked somewhere close, someone I can trust, you know, who has some IT knowledge.
Do you think that will ever become open knowledge?
I don't see in the short term anything happening. The police investigation is basically dead. It hasn't been properly investigated at all.
Nobody knows where his computer is, apparently.
And isn't that in itself the biggest indictment against the government? Because they did get his laptop. Everybody confirms that.
Yeah.
They did get his laptop, and where the fuck is it? Like, how can that disappear? That is a crucial piece of evidence in the custody of the United States government, and it disappears. If that is not an indication of foul play, what is? That in itself says enough. The fact that something like that happens is outrageous.
I'm going to get attacked for writing this, but I don't give a shit. I've written 2 set pieces. I got attacked by people.
What
Conspiracy
pieces
theories
did you write?
about Seth Rich, back when it was happening.
Well, you know,
But I don't give a shit.
the smartest way to go about this is really to put, and this is not going to be a short ride, that there are a couple of things that are very strong evidence. For example, that I knew something was going to happen. I'm not the kind of Nostradamus guy who gets on Twitter or gives an interview and makes predictions about the future. When I told Bloomberg in an interview that Julian Assange is going to become the biggest roadblock for Hillary Clinton in this presidential election, that was prior to any of the leaks. And I was pretty precise in what I said. I don't just go and give interviews before any of this happens, making predictions without knowledge. You know, I knew that information was going to become available, and I knew, because of the person that I put Panda in touch with, that it's going to end up with WikiLeaks.
The way he handled it, Julian Assange, was quite clever when he was interviewed on that Dutch TV station.
Yeah, but
He said it, but he didn't say it, who the source was, right? They put out a $20,000 reward for his capture. Either that's the truth, that it was rich, or it was some diversionary tactic by WikiLeaks to get us off the trail of the real.
I have to say, that is one thing that I don't agree with, that I don't like about this. I mean, I can understand that WikiLeaks wants to have a pristine record about protecting their sources, even after they're
Even a
gone.
dead one, yeah.
But, in my opinion, personal opinion, I don't know why Julian decided to do this. When an entire country is held hostage by this Russia narrative with the potential for significant conflict, you almost have an obligation to put your protection of a now dead source over the global implications that this investigation, this entire Mueller charade, basically launched and funded and started by Hillary Clinton, that would have on the world, the impact that would have. I personally would have made a different decision. I would have said, in this case, it is just too important that the truth is known. But here's what I'm afraid of, and I never spoke with Julian about this, in fact. Maybe Julian doesn't even know for sure where it came from, because there is another party involved. Remember, I put Seth in touch with somebody else. Maybe that person took over and, became the channel without Julian actually knowing where it all originated. But again, this is speculation. I don't know. Maybe that is why he's careful. It makes sense.
But he knows what you've said, what
Yes,
you said on Twitter,
yes,
what you're
yes.
saying to me now.
Yes, but why would he believe me? I'm a donor. I'm a supporter of WikiLeaks. But I'm also a flamboyant guy. I have my own battles with the United States, Maybe he just wasn't sure what to make of this. But in a way, I have to say, I decided to speak about this after Julian, in my mind, made the very clear remarks about Seth Rich. Until then, I kept it to myself.
You did say it without saying it.
Yes, but
You think it should have been more direct. I understand. I think I agree with that. Because there was a lot at stake here.
there's a lot at stake, and I'm getting criticized a lot for not providing everything and the full picture, and to have written a letter to the special counsel and not really releasing what I know.
But you've just told me everything you know today, didn't you?
Yeah, I did.
And you're going to let me write this.
Yeah, and I've not told that to anyone else. But the thing is, it would have been better if Julian, if he knows what I believe he knows, that Seth is the source, then I think he should have said more. I think to imply it with the reward and to even speak about his case, and there's this example of this young man in the United States working for the DNC, like he said it, but he didn't say it.
To try to protect his sources so that future sources...
Yeah, but if you protect your source, you don't say anything at all.
Yeah.
You
Well, he
don't
felt
even-
the need, that you've just described perhaps, that he needs to say something because of what's at stake in America and U.S. and
But,
Russian
I
America.
also don't want to criticize him because I don't know all the facts. Like, I
Right.
don't know what motivates him. Maybe he made a promise of some sort, or I don't know. Like, if
Yeah.
I were making a promise to someone, it doesn't matter what anybody says. I will stick to that, If there was some kind of commitment, it's easy for me to say I would have done things differently, but I don't know all the facts, see? So, yeah.
I interviewed Craig Murray on one of these vigils, and he says He has also not been contacted by the Mueller investigation. Julian hasn't been. You haven't been. So they're not interested in
I
going
mean,
there.
come on, not to speak or even seek information from WikiLeaks clearly shows that this is not a real investigation.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, that is like the biggest red flag. How can you not talk to the main witness who has released all this stuff? You know? And how can you rely on the intelligence community for your information that has their own agenda? They want to have conflict with Russia because their apartment spying on Russia is thousands of people large, thousands of analysts getting billions of dollars every year from US taxpayers. Of course you don't want to change that. Of course you want everyone to believe that this is a Russian plot to justify getting all this money and even increase your budget. You know, so how could Mueller, who by the way is of course part of this whole deep
Big
state
part of it, yeah.
operation, rely on that alone? It's just ridiculous. It makes the whole investigation a joke.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You're not going to go to the person who supposedly received the stolen
Exactly.
emails and at
And you know
heart,
what?
the heart of this.
Here's what's also important. He could have spoken, or in some way get the information from both WikiLeaks and myself and discredit it. If he's an investigator, who has evidence that shows that whatever the information that he received is wrong, he can put that out there and discredit us. He didn't even try that. He didn't even want to go, because I believe they already know exactly what happened.
Yeah.
And the reason that Rich's a laptop disappeared is because that there was stuff on it that completely verifies what Julian implicated, what I have said, and is completely against this Russian narrative, which they actually tried to use to get rid of Trump.
Yeah.
That was the goal, to destroy him and his image, and hopefully find something that allows them to impeach him.
That's right.
But here's what I wanted to say, because earlier we spoke about you writing a story about Seth. So there are a few important matters that need to be written about, and I don't think it can be done in a small way. Number one is my interviews that I've given and my tweets that I've made prior to the release of anything at all. Very specific. I knew that WikiLeaks would come out with a DNC and Hillary Clinton stuff. Very specific in both a televised interview and many of my tweets, right? And if you look at my history of tweeting or me giving interviews, I've never done this before. I'm not Nostradamus who makes predictions all the time. Completely out of character. But I did that because I knew something is coming, right? Then the analysis of the actual files by the former intelligence community members that determined, based on forensic evidence, that this data cannot have been transferred online, so it was not a hack. It was a copying process from a computer to an external device. Under a court of law, this evidence would survive any of the other stuff that the intelligence community has been putting out there about Guccifer and this being a hack and downloaded and all this stuff. It would not survive a test in a courtroom. Okay, that's another important thing. Then, of course, what Cy Hirsch has said, right?
Well, his FBI source said that they looked at the computer.
Exactly.
And
So,
showed them emails.
I mean, a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, even though it was taped without his knowledge, going and, it's just not credible that he pulled this out of his ass. It was too specific. You know, if someone tells a lie, it's not, you know, I mean, I don't have a psychology degree, but I'm pretty good at reading people. And when I listened to that, it was him just in the flow telling the truth from his own memory. It didn't sound like this was a creation of his mind.
Now,
you know?
why would he make it up anyway?
Huh?
Why would he make it up?
Exactly. There's no motive for him. I think him and Butovsky hardly even knew each other. Like he didn't have to impress anyone.
No, he didn't know him. He had this former CIA guy that I know put him together.
Ah, okay. So I think that is another very important piece that needs some more weight. And then, of course, the whole way the rich family has dealt with it. It's just not like, why would a mother and a dad not pursue every avenue to find the truth? How would they know if he did it or not? They would never know this. You know, why shut it down before questions were even asked, before I could even give a statement or WikiLeaks could be asked about this? Why would you not seek all information that you can gather about the murder of your son? How can you be so sure that he didn't do it? In my mind, that is something, you know, a question that should be put to your readers, you know, like put yourself in their situation. I'm a parent, I have 5 kids. If one of them would be murdered, I would take every avenue to find out exactly what happened. I would not leave any stone unturned. I would want to listen to anyone who comes forward with anything at all, just to see, is there something there? Could this be possible? I want to get to the bottom of this. Who killed my kid?
Back live here on CN Live. We have Bill Binney, former National Security Agency Technical Director, and Elizabeth Voss, my co-host, standing by. We've just listened to the third and final segment of my interview with Kim.com. Kim mentions a raid and his troubles with the U.S. For those who don't know, 7 years ago, his estate in New Zealand was raided by New Zealand police at the behest of the United States on a copyright violation. And he has not been able to leave the country for 7 years while this case is adjudicated. It is a civil offense in New Zealand, copyright. It's criminal in the US, and that is a basis of his appeal, that this should never have happened. He is awaiting now, he's gone to the Supreme Court and waiting the Supreme Court's decision on an extradition request from the US. They want Kim. Kim told me elsewhere in that interview, by the way, that he thinks his association with WikiLeaks may have had something to do with this extraordinary raid on his property that scared the hell out of his children and his wife. And he's been a donor of 500,000 euros. He's told me he's given WikiLeaks. So that's the reference there. Now, he makes clear that he tried to get the Mueller investigators and the congressional investigations to interview him, and that he'd come to the U.S. to testify if he were granted immunity, that he can go back to New Zealand. That was never even responded to. And he interestingly says that Seth Rich's parents are the ones who suggested he do that. I think there's some really extraordinary stuff in here. Bill, what did you think?
Well, I'm of the opinion that this whole business is a conspiracy by those involved in the United States government, who are the shadow government, if you will, or the deep state involved, and it's so intrusive into the military and industrial complex, the banking institution, and the technology people, that they're all tied together, and so that anybody that in any way exposes anything that they're doing that would embarrass them or in any way they object to, they always go and attack. Like for example, I keep referring back to Elliot Spitzer when he was going after the bankers for defrauding people for during the 2007 and 8 financial exchange crisis. I mean, they were passing around and falsely building up these mortgage packages, and they basically were swindling people all over the world. And so he was going after them. And so the government got together and they looked into the NSA database, of course, to find something on him. and they found something and used it against him to get rid of him. I kept asking, well, what was the probable cause to look at Elias Spitzer to begin with? And I see, he's going after our bankers. Oh, okay. You know, that's my point. And this is a much deeper thing. There's more people involved than you could shake a stick at in our government. And they're all a part of this. So they're trying to shut down all reporters in the world by taking and saying anybody reports anything we don't like or says anything we don't like, we'll extradite them for trial as a criminal against our laws. Now, that means the world has to conform to our laws. And that's fundamentally what's going on here. I mean, what reporter in the world now would dare to report anything that would be embarrassing to the United States if they had it classified and if they had it, would they not report it? I mean, the Guardian's done it, the Washington Post has done it, the New York Times, but now they're threatening everybody in the world with extradition to the United States. You know, that's what's going on, is threatening anybody, any reporter in the world from having free speech or anything else, you know? So I also, and this is fundamentally why they went after Julian, because he's been telling the truth. I mean, who else to tell the truth around here, you know? It's kind of a rare commodity. But at any rate, I had a little technical problem with one of the things that Kim.com had said, not that I know for sure, but my technical problem is that he thought that Linux type systems or operating systems were secure. I do not believe that is the case. You know, if you looked at some of the stuff that came out, for example, from the Vault 7 stuff, or even the NSA material that was leaked earlier, I mean, those are hundreds of millions of lines of source code that represent tens of thousands of attacks against firewalls, operating systems, networks, you know, servers, switches, everything. Everything on the network is being attacked. If there's a weakness anywhere, they have it. This is one of the bones and problems I had with the entire intelligence community, because it was a short-sighted thinking to have all these things there and know that these weaknesses exist and not fix them. If you don't fix them, that means we don't have cybersecurity. And then, you know, the next swindle comes up. Well, when we get attacked here, or like the OPM gets attacked and they lose all their data, well, they come around and say, now we need more money for cybersecurity. Well, maybe the attack that happened was because you left that weakness in the system and they were using that system. So, you know, why don't you fix what you know is wrong, and then maybe we'll have some cybersecurity. I call that the second swindle. The first swindle was the business of having to collect bulk data on everybody in the world, saying you have to give up privacy for security. That's been a lie from the beginning, and you knew that at NSA because we had proven that with thin thread programs. But again,
Bill,
toss it up, you know.
but where do you come down on this question of whether Julian Assange should have named directly Seth Rich as the source?
I think the point of protecting at that point became kind of irrelevant. I mean, I think I think Kim.com's exactly right that the issues at hand were more important than you know protecting your sources to the end, even though your sources may be no longer with us.
Now, there's one thing in this interview that is unfortunate from my point of view, that the chat that Kim says he had with Seth Rich under the handle Panda, he had saved it on a hard drive, and then because of this raid, because of his problem with the U.S., he didn't want to have it on his property, so he destroyed that.
Yeah.
What do you think, Bill?
It's unfortunate. I mean, you know, that would have been some clear evidence of what he was saying, and that would be documentation of it. So
yeah, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I had one question returning to that discussion, the back and forth you Joe, and Kim had about why didn't Assange, you know, directly name Seth Rich if Seth Rich was the source of the DNC emails, at least. And one question that I haven't heard mentioned before, and I kind of want to ask Bill about his thoughts on this, is, well, maybe if there were additional sources, whether of the Bethesda emails or that were working with Seth Rich potentially, that were not dead and that could have been implicated if Assange directly mentioned Seth Rich as a source. Do you think that's a possibility, or is that in any way likely to explain his kind of implication?
Well, no, I'm pretty certain, because of the sequence of events that I talked about earlier, that there were more people involved with him than if you assume that he was the leak. because he was, I think, murdered on the 10th of July, and then there was the 26th August release of data with the timestamps and showing it clearly being downloaded to with the FAT format file, for a file format. So it may be because if they point out, see, I know in terms of NSA, they should be able to lay this whole thing out, because they've got all the social networks of connectivity of everybody in the United States and the world. And so what that means is that if they pinpoint Seth Rich as the source, they will then be able to connect him with whoever may be else involved. So he may be thinking of that as something that he might not want to do because of that, for the reasons you stated, I think. But from my point of view, this should already be known, and the government should have acted on this years ago. I mean, this is not something. I mean, this is something that automatically people like me would do in the past, but these people we currently have don't seem to have a light bulb up there, They just are going along in the dark, I guess. I don't know how else to put it, but no, that may very well be one of his reasons, but that will not stop it from happening. It really wouldn't. So.
Right, and we know that. I mean, to date, I don't think that WikiLeaks or Assange has actually admitted that directly stated that Chelsea Manning was their source. So I think that they do definitely take that very seriously. Joe.
Yeah. Bill, it's interesting that Kim mentioned that they didn't even try to discredit him or Julian. Really, they just kind of ignored it. There is a bit in the final report which came out after this interview. Of course, the Mueller-Feller report, where Mueller is implying that Assange is lying about Russia not being the source. My argument, first of all, is how would Assange have known it was Russia? As Kim points out, it could have been this middleman that he put in between Seth and WikiLeaks, who could have been who Assange thought was was the source, or they may have been an intermediary. Did you see in the Mueller report where they're saying that Gustav 2.0 transferred these files and they gave a file number? Or file name. Then they also say there was an intermediary.
Well, you see, they also said that the IRA, Internet Research Agency, was, an agent, the trolling agent of the Russians. And when challenged in a court of law to produce the evidence, they had none. And I think the judge probably got so mad at them, he virtually threw them out of his court. Well, I mean, this is the entire fabrication that the government's been performing here in this Russiagate on everything. It's everything they've done is a fabrication. Guccifer 2 is a fabrication. It's provable by the forensics that we found. And I put this in a court case, in an affidavit. And the government now is backing away from it, saying, oh, well, that Russian hack isn't relevant anyway, so it's only about lying, okay? When in fact, the entire affidavit they submitted to get a warrant to do the search in the beginning was fundamentally based on the Russian hack and saying that this person was involved. That's the Roger Stone case.
Yeah, well, that's another one that's probably going to go nowhere. You know what's interesting? That was a woman judge who actually ordered Mueller not to talk about the Internet Research Agency being an agency of the Russian government. He was ordered not to talk about that. We now have this new case just the other day, again being thrown out. The WikiLeaks, DNC tried to sue Russia and WikiLeaks that they somehow were involved in meddling with the election. And we had also as I mentioned, the lawsuit against Patowski and Fox by the family was thrown out. But since Mueller's report has come out, where there was clearly no collusion found, and I'm sure he was trying to find it, and since this has gone nowhere, this has been a big dud. It looks like this is filtering now out into the courts, that we're starting to see that they've got the message. They're not taking this crap from the DNC to blame WikiLeaks and Russia for their loss in this lawsuit. It was thrown out, and that judge told Mueller not to talk about them together. This is extraordinary. I think that the message is getting out there, and the courts are siding with the facts now.
Yeah, and can I add one other court?
Sure.
The lawsuit, I mean, I've been supporting several lawsuits against the government for violating the constitutional rights of everybody. So in one of those cases, in the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, the judges, over the objection of the government, because I put in the affidavit that I submitted exhibits from Edward Snowden showing the Fairview tap points against the U.S. citizens across the country, all of the tap points and all the data that they're collecting from those tap points with AT&T and Verizon and so on. So included all that in affidavits because I said I invented half of this crap. So I'm quite capable of testifying exactly what happens here. And so now the judges in this case are, and so many motions were coming from the government just to delay it and slow roll it. But now the court has said we will hear over the objections of the US government, we will hear oral arguments in September. So now we're moving to oral arguments, and then we'll go to discovery and all kinds of things. So this could get very interesting indeed. We may actually, with the courts, have some chance of moving in the right direction.
And the most interesting thing I've heard on this program today is what you said, that the Attorney General could look for those files that the NSA has and declassify them. And if we could ever find, I said in this interview, we probably never find out who did this. And now what you've told me has made me change my mind completely. We might actually find out. Elizabeth, we're closing it out with Bill.
Bill,
your final thoughts to him. Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to ask you, kind of just open the floor to you before you, leave this segment. What are some of the, big, broad points that you think need to be made to our listeners that have been effectively stifled and censored from the mainstream media?
Well, I mean, the biggest point is what the government's been doing to us for all this period of time. What they don't understand is they've exposed themselves too, because all the evidence of what they've been doing is in the data they've been trying to protect, knowledge of being existing, like the bulk acquisition on everybody. I mean, that's acquisition on the members of the parliament and around the world, of our Congress, of the judges on the Supreme Court, of federal judges, state judges, it's everybody. So we had leverage, and it's stored for years. So now, I mean, like Mueller said in his interview with Bart Gellman in 2011, he talked about using the Stellar Wind program, or in his testimony in the Senate Judiciary Committee on the 30th of March of 2011, he said, we created this technology database with the Department of Defense where we can, with one query, go into it and get all the past emails and all future ones as they come in on a person. Now that tells you the extent of the intrusion in the communication system of the NSA. They're doing that and copying everything. And now we can use that now against them, because now we can discover everyone that's been involved with this, the extent of what they've been involved in included, and what exactly they did and how they coordinated the cover-up, So all of that information is there, and we can get back to it. And in order to cleanse ourselves of these basic sins against our founding principles, the Constitution, we need to do that. And some of the courts are starting, as we've said here with Joe. Joe is pointing out some of them, and some of the courts now are beginning to realize they are being fed a line. Certainly the FISA court has known they've been lied to all along, any number of times by these agencies. Now, when are they going to wake up and do something? If they aren't, we need to fire them and get rid of that court totally. Force everybody into the Third Circuit courts. So, and in the end, I've been arguing for the Article 5 of our Constitution, using that to have a constitutional convention separate from everybody in Washington, then redesign how we get people voted into Washington in all the positions. And my suggestion was to randomly select them from the phone book. We couldn't do any worse than we've got right now. So no one could, the lobbyists would go away. I mean, who would they lobby? You don't know who's coming in the next time, and that everybody's there, and it would actually become a public service. What we have now are permanently in place, petrified politicians, who are mentally in the Neanderthal age or something,
What a note to end on. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you for coming on and joining us.
Thank you, Bill. It was great. Good to have you on.
Thanks.
So, Elizabeth, we're going to bring in George when he comes in, and I think we have just to unwind a little bit about what we've heard today. What did you take away, Elizabeth, from our program?
Well, that's a huge amount of information, some of which I had never heard before. I thought it was fantastic that Kim.com allowed this interview to be aired. I thought it was fascinating to get his side of the story finally, because he's referenced it a lot on social media and in various interviews. So I'm really grateful that he was able to have that discussion with you and also was willing to have it aired publicly. I thought that basically, I think it expanded on what a lot of us suspected or thought about this case. Obviously, it doesn't provide us direct evidence to conclude finally one way or the other about WikiLeaks' source, but I think it's definitely important. And I'm also glad that Bill was able to come on and give his perspective and clarify some of these issues, leak versus hack when it comes to NGV Van and Goose for Two versus the DNC emails as published by WikiLeaks and the differentiation there. And it was just great to hear Bill's take on what Kim had to say.
Well, I second that. I'm really pleased Bill came on. George has joined us from Budapest.
Hi, Joe. Hi, Elizabeth. How are you?
I'm fine.
Great.
What did you take away from our discussion?
Well, it was very interesting. We started with Mike. Mike, always very illuminating, always insightful. What really is interesting that his party, the Democratic Party, is completely lost on the real issues. Now, Trump is pursuing probably the most aggressive foreign policy that any US president has pursued in a long time. I mean, this is a very, very aggressive policy. I mean, on Iran, on Russia, on China. And how are the Democrats responding? Which is, he's not aggressive enough. I mean, what he's been doing on Russia has been quite extraordinary. I mean, he's walked out on a major arms control treaty. He's about to let another major arms control treaty lapse, which means that arms control treaty is in place, which is the first time, I don't know, in about 50 years. And how are the Democrats responding? Well, not enough. Why are you being so friendly with Putin? I mean, it's mindless. Instead of saying, hey, we're kind of spiraling towards a very serious confrontation, saying, oh, he's being really friendly with Putin. Putin's got something on him. And what's your evidence for that? Oh, because he doesn't say anything mean about Putin in public. And he kind of has a friendly banter with him. That proves that Putin has something on him. So, never mind all the other things he's doing. Never mind walking out on the INF treaty. Never mind about sending arms to Ukraine. He doesn't call him names in public. I mean, it's nuts, and that's the Democratic Party. I mean, it really is quite extraordinary.
The Pentagon announced just today that they're going to develop a new set of short-range missiles right after the Intermediate Nuclear Force Treaty was negated today. Very, very dangerous stuff. And,
exactly. So if we go down that path of now an arms race in Europe, which is short-range, intermediate-range missiles being deployed in Europe, while there is actual conflict going on the European continent in Ukraine. This is a really dangerous escalatory stuff. And where are the Democrats on this?
Well, you said that this was the most aggressive foreign policy in a long time. And I would say since the George W. Bush administration, which ended in 2009. That's not 10 years ago.
No, that's probably true. That's probably true. But George W. Bush, I think, probably wasn't quite as aggressive towards Russia as Trump is. Well, largely because there wasn't the conflict in Ukraine. On the other hand, George W. Bush did make trouble for the Russians in Georgia. He did promise NATO membership for Georgia and Ukraine, which accelerated that crisis in Georgia in 2008. So, you're right. You're right that, the Trump-George W. Bush foreign policies are comparable. Which is, again, quite interesting that Trump explicitly ran against the Bushes in 2016. So no more George W. Bush. That's it. We don't want any more Bush era policies.
Yeah, and he did. He says he brought us to 10 minutes to a catastrophic war with Iran and pulled back. And what was the Democratic response to that? Of course, some of them weren't very pleased about this. And he hasn't launched a full-scale invasion yet on the scale of Iraq, which, by the way, no one had done since Vietnam, and it was the Vietnam syndrome, according to George Bush's father, that caused that. The militaries were sort of had to take a few steps back because of the debacle in Vietnam. And it took all the way up until from Reagan trying to rehabilitate, and he from 1980 until 2003. So that's 23 years before there was another major invasion. But it was also punctuated by the first Gulf War, 1991 by Bush's father, and he specifically said that we have kicked the Vietnam syndrome. So they were just edging to get back there. So Trump hasn't done that yet. But you're absolutely right that most of these Democrats are, exception of Tulsi Gabbard in particular, maybe Warren and Sanders, are not itchy-fingered to start some kind of war, and are not criticizing Trump for that, but for many, many other legitimate reasons.
Right. So in the meantime, now Trump is pushing for U.S. naval escorts in the Strait of Hormuz. And again, extraordinarily dangerous situation. I mean, it will almost certainly lead to some kind of shooting incidents, armed attacks, blown up tankers. This is really dangerous. And you can see why Germany is getting nervous. The Japanese getting nervous. A number of countries are this is, where is all this going? I mean, this Trump policy of maximum pressure, entirely recklessly triggered by him. But there was no reason whatever to do this. Is now leading into this armed escorts in the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, it's really, and again, the Democrats didn't say anything about this.
It all comes down to whether he could stand up to Pompeo and Bolton. And he did apparently that time when we came that close to getting into a war with Iran, but maybe next time he won't be able to. And this is the danger that we face, that Trump is not a very strong guy, and that he could very easily be swayed by them. We then talked to Kim.com, who, by the way, in other parts of that 4-hour interview went on this very topic about Trump being under the sway of these hawks. But George, what as I pointed out to Bill when he was signing off, I always thought, and I said in that interview, we'd probably never find out if it was Sethridge or not. Now there's a clear path to maybe finding that out because of this NSA FOIA response to Ty Clevenger, the lawyer for Ed Batowski, in which they said they were indeed 15 files of 32 pages about Sethridge communicating with one of a number of people. We just don't know who they are. And amongst them were Kim.com and Julian Assange. So if Attorney General Bill Barr, under his investigation, being led by Durham, the Attorney General of, the U.S. District Attorney in Connecticut, if they actually have the power, they do have the power to get that NSA records that were mentioned in that FOIA request, and Trump can declassify them, that would be the only path and a real concrete way to get into this Sethridge story. I'd find that really something that just hit me by surprise.
That was extraordinary. I hadn't heard that. I'd never even thought about that. Now these will be communications these will email or
anything, a phone call, text, email. The NSA, as Bill was telling us, sweeps it all up, and they could have an agent sitting next to a table and taping them, or from a truck outside, it can be taping any communication between Sethridge and these people. And the mistake, of course, they made was to include them all. So if he could have had a communication with someone other than Assange. But if he did, that's in that record, and Barr can go and get it. Trump can declassify it. It can be made public. And as I said, this is a partisan issue, so they may want to get that out. Trump would want to. My problem is Barr's former CIA, and will he want to protect the intelligence agencies? And Durham, by the way,
my feeling is that he would. I mean, given the news this week, which I find plausible, that that there was this recommendation from the Inspector General that to indict Comey, and it's now Barr's DOJ that is saying no, they don't want to do it. On the rationale that there's bigger fish to fry. We want to get Comey on something more important. No, get him on this. I mean, if you can get him on illegally leaking classified material, then get him on that. Then let's get on to the bigger stuff. But the idea that we're not going to get him on this little stuff, we're going to get him on the big stuff, I don't believe that for one moment. But that's Barr's DOJ. that is apparently vetoing any kind of indictment of Comey.
Not a good sign at all. And the other
No.
fact is that this Durham, John Durham, I think his name is, from
Yeah, I think that's
Connecticut,
Durham. Yeah, yeah.
he was the guy that first the Bush and then Obama administrations had put in charge of the investigation into the destruction of the torture tapes by the CIA and into the torture program itself. And he came up with nothing. Now, Ray McGovern argues in the piece that's up on Consortium News now that he has a new commander in town. In other words, he's a good soldier, Durham. If he was told by Holder and the previous administration, bury this, cover up for the CIA, he did that. So it all comes down to Barr and how much pressure Trump can put on Barr to really get to the bottom of it, to A, do that, get those documents from the NSA, and B, have, unleash Durham to really go after this. I have lots of concerns about both Barr and Durham, because in the end of the day, we can get very close to finding out some truths about secrets of the U.S. government over the decades, and then something always seems to happen. You remember even Trump was going to declassify the JFK documents after 50 years. That was a decision by the House of Representatives when they had their House investigation into assassinations. And then that day was coming, and he pulled out the last second because the CIA told him he shouldn't do it.
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
I fear we're going to get this close to maybe finding out the truth about Cetrich,
right?
And something's going to happen, and we're going to go back into the stupor that we live in, as if the government is good and they're protecting us, and we have to trust them and don't worry about it. And there's always once in a while a bad apple, but it's the whole orchard that's rotten.
Yeah, and Trump seems to be very susceptible to being intimidated. There was that other declassification when, and he was told, hey, if you declassify this, you've got allied interests, the British and the Australians will be very unhappy. I think that was to do with the FOIA request. I can't remember exactly. And again, he pulled back and said, no, let's leave that. We don't want to upset the British and the Australians. So he does come, he wants to declassify, but then as soon as the experts arrive and say, no, you're really jeopardizing vital national security interests, he pulls back. And that's why I think that in this case as well, if they said, hey, look, you can't possibly declassify this material about Seth Rich's communications, you would jeopardize American national security for the next 50 years. I think, again, Trump would just pull back.
But that's nonsense. That's what I'm trying to say. If they declassified stuff on JFK that showed, let's say, the CIA was involved, that could have ramifications. Certainly, the American public would react quite volatilely, I think, maybe to that, or should anyway. But in this case, if they had evidence that Russia did do it, which they really don't. I mean, they're putting it in an indictment. Let's see it get proven in court. Never will. In this case, this would have the opposite effect. It would help national security by lessening tensions with Russia if we knew that they had nothing to do with the hack.
Right.
It's exactly. They couldn't use that national security argument.
Right. That's absolutely. I guess they'll say, hey, well, these, we disclose sources and methods by revealing how the NSA operates. I guess that would be the argument. I'm not buying it, but that's probably what they would argue.
I don't care about the sources and methods. I care about the documents.
Me neither.
If there's a communication between Assange or anyone at WikiLeaks and Rich, we want to see it, obviously, to get to the bottom of this. It has nothing to do with the sources or the methods.
Absolutely.
How they did it? Who cares? Techniques they use.
Absolutely.
Now, do you agree with Kim.com that Assange should have come right out and said it, or would that have made a difference anyway to the Russiagators?
Well, that's a difficult one because he did come very close to saying it, and after all, Mahler and your friend Isikoff were pretty much saying, oh, he brought up the Seth Rich thing only in order to throw everyone off the scent. So already it's kind of, they're suggesting that he's lying deliberately in order to throw off the investigators. No, that it wasn't the Russians. So this is clearly the last bastion of Russiagate is this one, which is that the Russians hacked and then they passed on this information to Assange. That's really, I mean, everything else has crumbled. The whole collusion theory has crumbled.
Right.
Obstruction of justice is going nowhere. The whole, the internet research agency has crumbled. All the silly Facebook ads and everything, that's gone. All that's left is the Russians hacked the DNC and pass this information on to Julian Assange. That's all that's left, and they're going to fight for this. They're going to defend this bitterly, because once that's gone, then everything is gone. So really, this is really the last position that we have to storm.
Well, George, that would be the last word, unless Elizabeth wants to weigh in.
Well, I was going to add on that point. I mean, I completely agree, and I think that it almost seems to me as if Isikoff reviving the Seth Rich issue in order to try and smear it seems to have been a Hail Mary deflection from the demise of Russiagate as far as Mueller's testimony and that type of thing. But it, in my opinion, has backfired, because now we have this interview with Kim.com aired. We have all of these people discussing Seth Rich in a very legitimate way, and I think that I just want to ask you, George, what do you make of that? Do you think that Isikoff's attempt to deflect into the Seth Rich story, portray it as a conspiracy theory, do you think that backfired?
It could be. We'll have to see how it develops further, but that's quite possible. And I think it goes back to what Joe was saying earlier, I think, with when he was talking to Bill, which is that I think the judges are now getting bolder. As the pillars of Russiagate have crumbled, they're suddenly becoming a little more assertive, and they're not taking any crap from the government. So it may be that as the pillars of Russiagate crumbled, even in the public media, people will become a little bolder about saying, well, why were we so keen to dismiss about Seth Rich? I mean, why, what was the reason why is that this is the most heinous conspiracy theory of all time? I mean, why, how do you know it wasn't him? What's your basis? I mean, it may well be that it will become acceptable now for people to raise issues about Seth Rich. I certainly hope so.
The last pillars, the pillars on the last bastion are crumbling. It's really the first question I asked Isikoff, who I would not classify as a friend, George, but in any case, was why did you do this story to begin with? And I didn't really get a satisfactory answer to that, nor to many of my other questions. But the fact also that Medium, at the same time, put out this policy, Medium, the online site where people could post articles, same time put out this policy that if any article that ever mentions Seth Rich is being removed. I mean, is that a coincidence? Is it coordinated? Who knows? But why did they bring this up now? It was like nobody was told we wouldn't be doing these shows. I'm glad I got a really good news hook to use that Kim material that I had, because of all. So I thank Isikoff from the bottom of my heart for bringing up Seth Rich again.
Right. Was today the first time? I mean, I don't know. Did Kim.com talked about his interaction with Seth Rich, or has he talked about it before?
In this detail, no. He's tweeted about it. He's spoken about it. But I think in this detail, it was the most we've ever heard. Isn't that right, Elizabeth?
Yes, it absolutely is. And I believe that he said on Twitter just today that it's his one interview on this issue. So I don't think that he's, I mean, just to interpret from that and to extrapolate, I don't think that he's planning to do similar interviews in the near future.
I see. Yeah, that's right. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode of CN Live. And I wanted to thank Elizabeth Voss, my co-host, Mike Gravel, Bill Binney, George Szamuely, our executive producer, Cathy Vogan, our technician, the other Kim, Ebon Kim, and of course, our audience for tuning in. Remember, you could watch this on replay on our YouTube channel, and we will see you next Friday at 2 p.m. for the next episode of CN Live.
Get out your notebook. There's more.